and we'll just see. I'll throw out a lot of ideas here in this episode, and hopefully they will be beneficial. Hopefully my thinking on this will be somewhat beneficial. All right. First thing we want to do, we want to go to sermon audio right here. There are how many webcasts are currently underway? It looks like there's just two. I don't know what this one is. Some man standing. I don't know what that is. It's Omaha, Nebraska Reformed Church. That looks interesting. But he's standing. I don't know if it's like I don't know what's going on there. I don't know. The microphone, you can't hear anything. So it's cool that they're webcasting, but I can't hear anything that the man is saying. But that is happening currently. It's been on for 9 minutes. You can go check it out. I don't know what building they're standing in. I don't know if he went to some building to preach. I don't know, but that's currently underway. In the meantime, let's listen. Can't hear anything. Okay, let's listen to us. All right, we sound okay. Oh wait, did we start YouTube? I'm hoping we started YouTube. Hang on, let me go here. Do a search for Theology Central. We may not have started it. Hang on. Oh no, we're live. We're live. We sound okay. Oh wait, did we start YouTube? I got distracted by that other thing. So that's what happens when I start checking the Sermon Audio app. I always find something going on that I want to look at, something I'm interested in. All right. I think we're good to go. I've got 900 pages of notes. I've got way more notes than not that I need. Yeah, I don't know. I could talk all day about my struggles with putting this together, but that's okay. Hey, someone from Georgia is listening. Thank you so very much. I don't know. I think Georgia and North Carolina, I think you guys are going to be impacted by this big winter storm that's coming in. I think you're going to be impacted as well. If so, be safe. Hopefully it goes well. For us, they made it sound like we were all going to die in the great winter apocalypse of 2026. I've been looking at the weather models. I think the storm is shifting north. So I think we're going to get a lot of rain tomorrow, or probably maybe starting tomorrow around 11. I think we're going to get rain. I don't think it's even going to possibly even think about changing over to any kind of ice till around midnight, Friday night going into Saturday. Originally, it was supposed to turn to ice starting around 11 o'clock tomorrow, but there's no way that's going to happen. The temperatures are way too warm, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen. Now we're going to get some cold weather on Saturday and Sunday that's going to be dangerous. But originally they were predicting that we were going to get 12 to 18 inches of snow. And I was like, if that was to happen, we would all die. I mean, Texas is not built for that, right? So I'm like, it'll be the end of the world. And so then they started lowering the predictions. And now looking at the map or looking at the models, no, we're going to get probably 2 inches of rain tomorrow. That's what's going to happen. We'll probably shift over to some ice. And then depending how much ice falls and how much ice falls and how much of the water that's on the ground freezes, that's where some of our problems will come. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I'm not as worried about it as I was. I mean, I was skeptical from the very beginning, but wherever you are, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, all of those in the South, if this storm comes through your area, hopefully it's less impactful as they have predicted. But I didn't think Texas was going to get, I didn't think it was going to be that bad. But all right, enough with all of that. Are you ready? Let's do this. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, we go live. And 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, January the 22nd, 2026. It is currently 12:16 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, yesterday, I told you that could have been my last broadcast because they are predicting the winter apocalypse to come through here and destroy all of us and kill all life in the state of Texas. I have been very skeptical, and looking at the latest weather models, it looks like the storm is shifting north. I think it's going to get obviously crazy cold for Texas Saturday and Sunday. I mean, we're in a cold weather emergency. Yeah, I mean, it's like we're not ready for that. So that could be, that could cause a lot of problems. And our power grid typically goes down if the temperature drops below 40. So we will see how it all plays out. I've been skeptical, and now I'm kind of like, I didn't think so. I think we're going to get a lot of rain starting tomorrow around 11 o'clock. It will start raining. It was supposed to turn into ice starting tomorrow at around 11:30 a.m. It's not going to happen. It won't change over to ice until somewhere closer to midnight, and then we'll just see how much ice actually falls. I don't know. We will see. There's been times I remember. There's been times where they are like, we're not going to get anything, and then we get hit hard with a winter storm. A lot of the times when they say we're going to get destroyed, and you walk outside the next day and it's 72 degrees, and you're like, so much for that winter storm. So you can become kind of like you don't take it serious, but I'm trying to take it serious, and we will just see. As long as I got power, I got heat, I got internet, I'm good to go. I lose any of those things, then I'm panicking and I'm getting in the car and I'm driving somewhere. All right. So we will see how it all plays out. But in the meantime, we got work to do, right? We have a lot to work to do. And so this is going to be a lot of history. It's going to be like kind of a church history lesson, but it's going to be a church history lesson about something far more. Well, for many of you in your lifetimes, you've watched a good portion of this all take place. I've encountered a lot of this in my life, so we'll be able to talk about some modern church history. But before we do that, I got to offer kind of a correction, kind of a clarification, maybe an apology. Now, whenever I do sermon reviews, you have to remember I go into the sermon review completely blind, right? Sometimes I have a basic idea. Sometimes I will know a little bit, but probably the majority of the time, I don't know anything other than the title and the text. And then I just hit play. We listen to it live in real time. So my response is in real time. So it's not like I've got it all mapped out. I got everything planned, and I can ensure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted. So sometimes I may say something and then have to come back and offer clarification. So yesterday we went back to 1988 to review a sermon that was talking about the terrible, terrible thing that has happened to fundamentalism. All right. And I knew that the terrible, terrible thing that had happened to fundamentalism, according to this sermon from 1988, is that the ancient landmarks have been removed, specifically one such ancient landmark, and that's somehow the landmark of soul winning. Now, I was already so irritated with the sermon and so frustrated because whenever you hear these sermons about don't remove the ancient landmarks, it's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. That's not what the landmarks are about. The landmarks were literal physical boundary stones marking someone's land. You were not to remove the boundary, the landmark, and just take their land. This was about stealing. This was about taking advantage of the weak. I mean, that's what it was about. It wasn't about, don't remove the ancient landmarks of preaching or Bible study or the Wednesday night prayer meeting or whatever ridiculous thing people say. So I was already going into the sermon extremely frustrated and irritated, but I thought it was a great example of a sermon trying to talk about the terrible thing that happened to fundamentalism. And in my estimation, the sermon proved what was wrong with fundamentalism. You can't read a simple verse in the book of Proverbs and understand what it means. You turn it into some slogan for your propaganda. That's the problem. So I wanted to illustrate that. I was not prepared, however, that in the sermon, he made a claim about the Southern Baptist Convention. And that claim went something like this, and I am paraphrasing, that there were 7,000 Southern Baptist churches that did not have one baptism of a new convert. Not one. 7,000 churches. Now, when I immediately heard that, my first reaction, well, I know that's a lie because I was in a Southern Baptist church in 1987 and saw countless people baptized. That's not true. And I'm like, there's no way they didn't have any converts or any baptism. So I looked it up, and according to official Southern Baptist denominational report, they had over 20,000 baptisms. So I'm like, the man just straight up lied. But I did. There was a brief moment in my mind that I wanted to go, well, wait a minute. He says 7,000. How many Southern Baptist churches were there in 1987, right? But I didn't give it much thought, right? I just thought, well, I mean, if he's saying 7,000 didn't have one and he's not offering any context and any additional numbers, then he's stating that to give the impression that, well, they didn't have any, right? And so I was like, I obviously lost my mind, but we have good listeners here to this podcast. So someone sent me a message 12 hours ago on YouTube, and it reads this way. I don't want to defend this guy, but maybe there were 35,000 or so total SBC churches in 1987, and he was claiming that at least 7,000 out of whatever that total number was were stagnant and had no baptisms. I don't think he was claiming that no SB church whatsoever and the whole convention that year had baptized anyone. And then it has in parentheses, lifelong SBC denomination member here. The 1987 SBC annual report is actually online in PDF format, right? And that's what, when I asked AI about it, AI pulled from that annual report and gave me the actual number of baptisms. But he's absolutely right. I didn't think about, maybe there were like 35,000 SBC churches, and he's just saying 7,000 of them were stagnant and not one of them had any baptisms. But so I want to make it very clear that I treated it as if he was saying there were no baptisms in the entire Southern Baptist Convention. That's the way I took it, right? Which just blew my mind because I'm like, well, I was sitting in one in 1987. There were plenty, okay? So I was like, so already, that's just how I reacted. So I want to make it very clear. It appears that what he was saying is that out of all the Southern Baptist churches, 20, I don't know what the number was, 7,000 of them were stagnant. 7,000 of them did not have a baptism. And he was utilizing that to see, because they're not soul winning, because they had removed the ancient landmarks of soul winning. Now I can say we could get into all of the theological arguments there, but I just want to make it very clear. I think I clearly misrepresented exactly what he was saying, and I apologize for that. But I responded on YouTube to the person who sent the original message. I said, that may be a good explanation, but I am going to say this. I think it's disingenuous to just use 7,000 churches that supposedly had none and ignore the 20,000 plus baptisms that seem to have occurred. I mean, if you're going to say, well, 7,000 didn't have any, well, the denomination had over 20,000. So you would have to go take those 7,000, you would have to look at every individual church and try to figure out what was going on. What was happening? Out of those 7,000 churches, how many are new? How many are maybe getting ready to close down? How many are going through? There could be a million reasons. But obviously his implication was they lost the zeal and the power for soul winning. That obviously was his argument. And I said, well, my little church in West Texas at that time had probably 20 or 30, maybe even more. But you may be right. And I says, I will offer that possible explanation in part 2 right at the start. Because, I want to be accurate. I want to be fair. And I do. So he may not have been saying the entire, that the entire SBC convention, Southern Baptist Convention, did not have one baptism. But man, even out of that 7,000, I would like to know how he came to that conclusion, how he came to that number. And what does that actually say? And if you're going to go after the SBC, why didn't you tell me how many independent fundamental Baptist churches in 1987 didn't have a baptism? Why didn't you give me that number, right? It just seems so using a statistic with no context. So I should have been more careful, and I should have probably done more thinking, but I was reacting in real time, but I wanted to clarify that. So, yeah, I just know this, and this may be another problem that probably influenced me. I was already frustrated with the whole landmark thing, but here's my thing. If you were a part of the fundamentalist world in 1987 through the 90s into the 2000s, you know this. That movement hated the Southern Baptist Convention. They loathed the Southern Baptist Convention. When I lived in Nebraska, the first church we were attending was a Southern Baptist church. And then we visited an independent fundamental Baptist church. And when that pastor came to visit me and found out we were attending a Southern Baptist church that wasn't too far down the road from where his church was located, he basically left us with this message that the Bible tells us to come out and be ye separate and touch not the unclean thing. That the Southern Baptist Convention was basically corrupt, they were heretics, and that we should leave that and go to an independent fundamental Baptist church and separate ourselves from such a corrupt denomination. That was their mindset. And look, I can go through all this, the independent fundamental Baptist schools I attended, Bible institutes, seminaries. I know that world very well, and they viewed the Southern Baptist Convention as completely corrupt. In fact, most of those who end up going into fundamentalism came out of the SBC. They felt the SBC was corrupt, that they had been compromised, so they left their SBC seminaries, SBC Bible colleges, and they formed Bible institutes and the local church, and they formed their own Bible colleges and basically told everyone, leave the denomination, leave the convention, and, well, basically start an independent fundamental Baptist church. So when I heard him say that, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. It's the same anti-SBC propaganda, and they're going to try to just use this number. But I should have caught 7,000. There was a lot more than 7,000 SBC churches in 1987. I should have known that. So I don't have the exact number, but let's say there was 15,000. Then he found 7,000 that supposedly had no baptisms. But of course, he gave us no source, no anything. So I wanted to be accurate and wanted to clarify that so that we can move forward and hopefully be as accurate as possible in talking about, well, the history of fundamentalism and what went so terribly, terribly wrong, and see what lessons we can learn from it. Okay? So, in part one, we examined that sermon from 1988. And that sermon attempted to try to explain what went wrong with fundamentalism. And as I've already stated, its argument, its thesis is they remove the ancient landmarks, and cursed is anyone who removes the ancient landmarks. And the landmark in question was soul winning. All right? Whole thing is ridiculous. Whole thing falls apart. And to me, I mean, I don't know about the average listener, but for me, I found the entire hypotheses of that sermon disturbing, because by 1988, what did we learn by listening to that sermon from 1988? This is what we learned: that fundamentalism at that point could no longer even interpret a simple Bible text in its own context. Look, if you're going to get behind a pulpit in 1988 and rant and rave that, oh, there's something terribly wrong with fundamentalism, and then you demonstrate you cannot read a simple verse in the book of Proverbs and even understand it or interpret it even remotely correctly, I'm sorry, your movement is dead. Your movement is garbage. Stop worrying about the Southern Baptists not baptizing new converts in 7,000 churches. You may be worried about the fact that you can't read the book of Proverbs and interpret a simple verse that kids in Sunday school should be able to figure out. Oh, it just drives me crazy. And they took, and just think what he did. He took a verse about stealing your neighbor's land, and he stole the text and used it for his own, to turn it into a slogan for preserving his 20th century American church soul winning program. It's a verse about stealing land. He steals that verse to use it for his own propaganda about we have to have our soul winning programs. The irony there is so bad. All right. So to me, that sermon that we reviewed, and we didn't review the whole thing, we didn't need to. It didn't just describe the problem. It embodied the problem. It was the problem. So here's what I've decided. Because my original goal was to just take the landmark issue and then in part 2, come back and review the rest of the sermon. But we reviewed enough of that sermon that I feel like spending another hour listening to all of his anecdotes and his stories, all built on a broken foundation. They stole the ancient landmarks. I'm going to step back in this episode and do something I think is far more important. And I'm going to try to ask maybe a deeper question. Are you ready? You want to write this question down? What was fundamentalism actually supposed to be in the first place? When we think of fundamentalism, what was it supposed to be in the first place? What was it supposed to be? If we know what it was supposed to be, we know what it became, and maybe somewhere between what it was supposed to be and what it became, we can figure out what went terribly, terribly wrong, other than misrepresenting, misinterpreting, and abusing a text in the book of Proverbs about the ancient landmarks that has nothing to do with all the stuff fundamentalists think are landmarks, because the landmark was an actual boundary stone. Okay. So we got to get this back into the realm of reason and logic and historical study. And I love church history. So I think this should be, hopefully, I'm going to try to make it interesting and try to make it fun. And I'll try to throw in a lot of my own little anecdotes and stories to try to capture some of these problems. And I will say, I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but so here's how it worked. I was a Southern Baptist, just so that we have my theological background. So I was saved in a Southern Baptist church during an October revival meeting, right? Told the story countless times. I could go all through it. I was in that Southern Baptist church. And that church was very big about revival and evangelism. And it was really going after all the young people in West Texas in the 1980s, and a lot of emotionalism, a lot of kids going down the aisle, a lot of kids getting baptized, a lot of things about rock and roll and dancing and, think Footloose. All right. A lot of that. So I was there. But for me, while I was there, I kept asking deep theological questions. I had questions about doctrine and theology and church history, and question. Didn't feel like I was getting any answers. I felt I was getting moralism and just weak sermons. And now let me be very honest with you. I did not handle myself in a godly way. I became an arrogant, condescending jerk. I basically mocked the Sunday school teachers like, this is stupid. You people don't know what you're talking about. You don't do any study. You don't do any reading. And I was just an arrogant little punk, okay? But I couldn't handle not getting answers. So I left the SBC and became a Lutheran, because the thing I loved about Lutheranism is I was handed things like the Augsburg Confessions, Luther's Larger and Small Catechism, the Book of Concord. I was handed all these great historical documents and these theological works, and I was like, this is everything. This is everything the SBC wasn't, with their just stupid programs. And every time the young people did stuff, it was like a lock-in or a pizza party. It was stupid. I wasn't learning anything. I was like, I would rather just go slam my head into a brick wall than have to play these reindeer games with everyone. So I was like, all right, Lutheranism, here we go. Doctrine, theology, church history, law and gospel. And I didn't necessarily understand the significance of it at the time, but I was definitely there, right? Then, So my life is in complete turmoil. I won't go through all the stories of my life. Everything's a mess. I end up in the United States military. I end up in Germany. All right. I end up in Germany and I meet a guy who's a Southern Baptist. Right. And we start talking and we have these long, late night, 2 a.m, 3 a.m. discussions about baptism. Because I'm a Lutheran, we believe in infant baptism and we believe in baptismal regeneration, that you put that water on the baby and it becomes a Christian. So he had a Strong's Concordance and we went through every single verse in the Bible about baptism. And I was asked to find where babies are being baptized. And you know what? You don't find any babies being baptized, no matter how many games you try to play. So I had lots of struggles and I didn't know what to do. And then we're in Germany. He has access to a car. We go driving somewhere in Swabruck, Germany. I don't remember where we end up, but we end up at a independent fundamental Baptist church. Now, I walk into that independent fundamental Baptist church. I'm wearing a Petra shirt, right? The Christian rock band Petra. If you know anything about independent fundamental Baptists, they hated contemporary Christian music. They hated Christian rock as being worldly. And I was carrying an NIV, which if you know anything about independent fundamental Baptists, they loathe the NIV. They call it the never intended version, and they think it's basically a work of Satan. So I came in not in the right place. But what I immediately loved about the independent fundamental Baptists is there was a seriousness there, right? There was a seriousness. They preached. It was like a 45, maybe an hour-long sermon. It was, now at that time, I thought it was great preaching. I didn't have all the skills to be able to interpret it. So there was a lot there. And so when I finally leave Germany and I find myself back in Nebraska, we leave the Southern Baptist Church. We go visit an independent fundamental Baptist church. I become a member of the independent fundamental Baptist church, and I'm there for a long time. I become a student in their Bible Institute. I get ordained. And then from there, I won't go through all the stories that everything. I saw a lot of the craziness of the fundamentalist movement, and then I end up in another kind of it's independent, but it feels more like an SBC church. And I end up there. And then finally, ultimately, after a very long time, come back to Texas and then, end up in my own church. All right. Which was an independent Baptist church. So I've been a part of it all and I've seen a lot of it. And of course, during that whole time, I went to independent Baptist Bible Institutes, independent Bible Baptist colleges, independent Baptist Bible seminaries. All right. So I went to, so a lot of my theological training is in this world. So I'm not going to say I'm an expert on it, but I've witnessed a lot of it is what I'm going to say. So here's what we're going to try to do. What was fundamentalism supposed to be and what did it turn into? I will try to explain what it was supposed to be and then try to take you through everything I experienced and through history to try to show up where we're going to be, where it ended up. I don't think there's any way I can get through this in any reasonable amount of time. All I can do is do the best I can and we'll stop where we need to stop. All right. So does that kind of set everything up? All right. So, and here's the reason we're going to do this. I'll say it this way. We cannot explain what went wrong with the movement unless we understand what it was originally supposed to be and what it originally was. So what was the original movement trying to defend? And what was it never meant to become? And did it become the very thing it was never meant to be? So today we're going to walk through what existed before fundamentalism, why fundamentalism arose. We're going to talk about the Niagara Bible Conference, the Niagara Creed, the publication of the Fundamentals, the Sword of the Lord newspaper, what fundamentalism actually was and what it wasn't, how it slowly changed, how method replaced theology, how success replaced faithfulness, and why its collapse, I don't think was necessarily an accident. I think it was the trajectory that the movement started following. And then we'll try to see if we can learn some lessons from it. So let's go to the world before fundamentalism. Let's go to the world. Now, I know, fundamentalists will be like, fundamentalists have always been there. John the Baptist was a fundamentalist. We're talking about describing a movement within church history known as fundamentalism. All right. You can argue that there have always been Bible fundamentalists. Okay. That we could argue that from a theoretical standpoint, but as a movement, fundamentalism, we're going to try to focus in on that. So before we end up with this movement known as fundamentalism, what's going on before it? Because knowing what's going on before it explains why fundamentalism came to be, all right? And I think to even understand fundamentalism, we got to understand, and this is important, listen to me carefully, fundamentalism was reacting to the world that existed before fundamentalism arose. Fundamentalism at its very core was it was reacting, it was responding to, all right? So by the mid to late 1800s, you have Protestant Christianity in Europe and parts of America was facing kind of enormous intellectual and theological pressure. There was a lot of intellectual and theological pressure being placed upon Christianity. A lot, all right? There was a lot. And this led to some things that of course, fundamentalists fought strongly against. And you probably know some of them, right? You probably know some of these things. You should, right? If you know anything about church history, you should know about them because during the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, all of a sudden you get what we call higher criticism of the Bible. Higher criticism of the Bible. Challenging things about maybe textual variants and challenging how this should be translated, how this should be understood, the dating of a book, all kinds of different things like that. They were offering some criticisms, right? And so they were doing so from an intellectual standpoint, right? So this was placing intellectual and theological pressure. They begin to deny things like the Mosaic authorship of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That they begin to deny Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch. They just said, no way. Didn't happen, all right? A lot of the so-called what we would call predictive prophecy. Hey, look here. This was predicting that this was going to happen. They came along and said, whoa, that's not predictive prophecy. That was written after the fact. No. You got the dating of the book wrong. The book wasn't written then. It was written after the fact. This is not predictive prophecy. This is written after the fact to look like prophecy. What are you talking about? They began to deny many of the miracles. They were like, well, was it really the Red Sea that were parted? Was it maybe the Reed Sea or something along that line? Was it actually that deep? And they began to create, well, these miracles could be explained. Maybe this was just their kind of superstitious way of explaining things in their ancient mind. And they become very critical of the miracles in the Bible. They ultimately deny the bodily resurrection of Christ. And they really kind of just begin to reduce Christianity to ethics and moral improvement. Kind of an ethical system, a philosophical system, not a supernatural how we would say it, a revelation. It was more just a philosophical principles written in this this narrative type way to give us stories and examples, if that makes sense. That's kind of what was going on. And so guess what happened? That way of thinking started showing up in seminaries. So seminaries are being viewed by many as the enemy. They're not seminaries, they're cemeteries. They're putting out this stuff. They're making Christianity all this intellectual stuff, and they're arguing about all of this kind of stuff. And Many of those seminaries were supported by denominations like the Southern Baptist denomination. So they saw Christianity was being redefined into a moral system, not into it's a moral system. It's not a supernatural revelation. Let's put it that way. It's a moral system. It's not a supernatural revelation. And they may have gone so far in many cases, they may have still tried to claim that the scripture was inspired, but not the way that we would think of it. And so they changed the definition of what it means that the scriptures were inspired. And it just, there was a lot of this happening. And a lot of this higher criticism came in from Germany and from different parts of Europe. It came over to here, and it was infiltrating, especially in areas of more academic kind of thinking, right? In seminaries where they could think about these things. And so obviously this is going to strike fear and panic in some ways. And I'm not saying it was, like everybody's running around screaming, but I'm just saying, let's put it this way. It begins to raise grave concern from those in the pulpits in the actual local churches. And obviously it began to raise some concerns for those in the pew. Hey, what is happening? Christianity is being ripped apart by those claiming to be Christians in these seminaries and Bible colleges. So in a roundabout way, they were looking around going, man, the Bible is no longer being treated as God's word. It's just being treated as a religious record of human experiences. Jesus is no longer being preached primarily as a savior, but more as a moral example. So this is very important. Conservative Christians at the time did not create a new movement because they were bored, right? They reacted because they believed the faith itself was being dismantled from the inside. They felt, wait, we're Christians and the wolves are inside the gate. The enemy has breached the walls. We're being attacked. We're being destroyed from the inside, from the very institutions that are supposed to be training the men of God. We've got a problem that we're under attack, but the attack is coming from inside the gates. So fundamentalism at its very core was a defensive movement. It was not a creative one. It wasn't trying to create something. It was trying to defend what was. It was trying to defend, are you ready? The fundamentals of the faith. It wasn't trying to create anything new. It was trying to defend that which was old. It was not born out of a need for innovation. It was born out of a crisis. Christianity is, we got to defend this. We got to do something about this. And if you study kind of what happens, once they realize we got a problem, this is a mess, you kind of have two different approaches now I'm not maybe oversimplifying this, but just so that you understand what happens. You got Christians going, what is going on? And you kind of had two approaches, right? We'll call one evangelicalism. And its approach was, well, we're not going to fight and argue and split and divide. We're going to try to work together on what we can work together on, and then not work together what we can't work together on. And we're just not going to, some people may have more intellectual approach to Christianity and think we're going to still have our fervor, but we need to be unified. We need to stay together. If we don't stay together, then Christianity is going to divide. We become weak. We lose the culture wars. So evangelicalism was going to take a more gentle approach, not being so bombastic, not attacking, not calling out names. It was going to be much more, can we dare say, mainstream, much more, hey, you can go there. You're going to get encouraged. You're going to get nice buildings, nice programs. It's going to be nice music, nice atmosphere, positive, uplifting, encouraging, not, you have entered into the war. We are here and we're mad at everyone and we're going to fight everyone and we're going to take them down and they're heretics and they're evil and they must be destroyed. Okay. No, it's like, well, do we go to that church or this church? Well, evangelicalism took the more gentle, much more mass appeal approach. And the fundamentalist was like, you people are compromisers. You're cowards. You're worldly. You're ungodly. We're going to draw a line in the sand and we're going to fight and we're going to defend and we're going to call out names and we're not going to back down. And so they began, that's where this idea of the fighting fundies come along, the fighting fundamentalists. They're going to fight. So you got those who are compromising, if you look at it from that way. You've got we'll call it the higher criticism. You may call it liberalism. You may call it whatever you want to call it. You've got that kind of building and showing up everywhere. And then you've got Christianity going, okay, how do we respond? The evangelical took a more, hey, let's agree to disagree. We can all get along. Come on, let's make church nice and fun. And then you have the fundamentalists who declared war. And said, oh, no. Not only are we declaring war, we're going to leave your institutions. We're not going to send our people to the seminaries. We're pulling out of the seminaries. Oh, your denomination's got this stuff. We're going to leave your denominations. You know what we're going to do? We don't need your denomination. We don't need your stinking seminaries. We can go build our own churches. We can go build our own Bible colleges. We can go build our own Bible institutes. We don't need any of this trash. So they took that approach. There's where you got to get a major three-way split. Stream one is all the way academia, intellectual, higher criticism, challenging the Bible, maybe even challenging the canon, challenging inspiration, challenging the bodily resurrection, maybe even challenging the deity of Christ. Very intellectual, very skeptical and critical. And then you got evangelicalism like, well, we don't want to fight all of this. And they tried a much more gentle approach, right? And then you had the fundamentalists who are like, we're going to throw grenades and we're going to fight, metaphorically speaking. Right? And so there you kind of get your three-way split. And this really kind of sets up kind of the 1900s. And of course, what also is going to come showing up in the 1900s? You've got the crazy, whacked out charismatics are about to show up and ruin everything and corrupt everything. Okay. So you kind of got a lot happening in this moment in time. All right. So you have to realize that fundamentalism at its very nature is a defensive movement. It was not created a creative one, and it was not born out of innovation. It was born out of crises, and it was like, we're going to fight. So if you go to 1878 to around 1878 to 1897, long before, and in a sense that people would be necessarily referring to themselves as fundamentalists, long before someone would be referring to themselves as a fundamentalist, you had something that was very important, and we've talked about it a number of times. And you want to write this down. You end up, so between 1878 and 1897, you end up with the Niagara Bible Conference. The Niagara Bible Conference. This is so key in church history. All right. Conservative leaders, they may even refer, I don't know if they would have referred to them as evangelistic leaders or evangelical leaders, but conservative leaders. These are conservative Christians. Let's call them that. Conservative theologically. If I use conservative and liberal in this discussion, please, for the love of bubblegum, do not in any way associate that with stupid political conservatism and liberalism. I can't stand that. Political labels do not belong within Christianity. We should not even get involved with that nonsense. No, conservative theologically or liberal theologically, not politically. All right. Oh my goodness. I can't stand how people conflate those ideas. All right. So you have conservative Christian leaders who start gathering at the Niagara Bible Conference. These were annual conferences where pastors, theologians, and Christian leaders came together to do a couple of things. Defend the authority of Scripture. The Bible is the inerrant, inspired, infallible Word of God. It is without error. It is without mistake. It does not contradict itself. They were going to go and they're going to defend. Why? Because you got the higher criticism that's offering all of these criticism. Moses did write the first 5 books of the Pentateuch. No, and so they began to defend it. They try to affirm core Christian doctrines, key doctrines, the virgin birth, the substitutionary atonement, just key doctrines. They begin to defend those core doctrines. They begin to push back against theological liberalism. Okay, again, not political, theological liberalism. They begin to emphasize the supernatural nature of Christianity. Now, this is very important because the charismatics are going to come along and they're going to emphasize the supernatural nature of Christianity, but they're going to do so in a crazy, signs, wonders, speaking in tongues, and all the craziness that occurs. God speaking to me in a vision or in a dream or audibly. Okay. And we could get into a discussion. Was the rise of charismatic theology a response to this attack upon the supernatural nature of Christianity? Right? Instead of, what's better? Hey, I'm not going to get into some argument about the miracles in the Bible being true or not. I'm going to demonstrate miracles are happening right now. People are getting healed. People are hearing from God. People are having visions. Like people are speaking in tongues. Then you're defending the supernatural by doing the supernatural in a sense. So we could get into that whole historical discussion, but for now we're going to stay with fundamentalists, all right? And another thing, especially at the Niagara Bible Conference, they were very premillennial, dispensational, right? So they discuss eschatology. They discuss Bible prophecy, and they believe those Bible prophecies are literal prophecies about literal Israel, literal land. And so a very historical, grammatical, literal hermeneutic is present in the Niagara Bible Conference as well. All right. Now, this is important. They were not meeting at the Niagara Bible Conference to come up with church growth strategies. That's not what they were there for. They were not there to debate the latest and newest and best evangelism techniques. They weren't there to do that. They weren't there to create programs. They weren't there to talk about numbers and who's having the biggest numbers. And no. Niagara was about truth. It was not about technique. It was not about a movement. It was not about a program. It was about defending what they believed to be biblical truth. That's the Niagara Bible Conference. If you want to see fundamentalism maybe in a more pure form to what its original intent was, the Niagara Bible Conference, that's where I would point you. They're defending truth. Now, just know what they're doing there. Like they're responding to a crisis. They're fighting for biblical doctrine. Come on, That's where you're like, okay, that's good. Whether you agree with the doctrine or disagree with the doctrine, they're defending doctrine. It's theological, it's doctrinal, it's biblical. It's not what it all turns into. Now, from that movement comes the Niagara Creed, which affirms things like the inspiration and authority of the Scriptures, the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the substitutionary atonement of Christ, the bodily resurrection, the reality of miracles, and the literal second coming of Jesus Christ. And I've did an entire series on the Niagara Creed. Everyone should look at the Niagara Creed. Everyone should read the Niagara Creed. Everyone should have a copy of the Niagara Creed, because we talk about the ancient creeds, the Apostles' Nicene and the Athanasian Creed. Everyone should know the Niagara Creed because it was right there in the late 1800s, 1900s, defending these things because these things were being attacked within Christianity itself. And they were like, we've got to defend this. And what's a great way to defend error? or defend against error and to protect the truth is you've got to clearly lay it out in a creedal way that's easy to remember, easy to study, easy to be used in teaching and training and discipleship. And it's just funny because once you get into independent fundamental Baptists, once you find the fundamentals as you go into the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, you never... Look, of all the independent fundamental Baptist schools I attended, all the independent fundamental Bible institutes I attended, guess what? I never learned. I never learned the Niagara Creed. I never even heard it mentioned, which is baffling to me. Because it stopped being about what it was about. You think this would be like standard? Oh, you're going to be a student at this Independent Fundamental Baptist Bible Institute? Well, here's the Niagara Creed. Start reading it and memorizing it. There's going to be a test on it. But no, they abandoned it. It's just bizarre. The creed gets kicked to the curb. Don't tell me they didn't abandon it. They throw it in the trash. Which, that to me, if you want to know the terrible, terrible thing that happened to fundamentalism, it's right there. They abandoned what the movement was about from the beginning. That's your doctrinal foundation. That's your theological foundation. And your movement is about defending this and fighting against the error. Now, they started wanting to fight against the error, but the errors they start fighting against are ridiculous things they start fighting against. And just notice something. The Niagara Creed was not a ministry method statement. It was a doctrinal confession. Niagara was about what must not be surrendered, not about how churches should be run. That's what it was. So the Niagara Conference and the Niagara Creed, man, there you go. Just stop. If we could just freeze everything right there, if we could just freeze it right there. Fundamentalism, I mean, let's just leave it there. We're on to something. We're doing something. And who cares if the evangelicals want to take this nice, soft, let's all get along approach. I'll stand with the fundamentalists and let's fight. We're fighting for something. That's powerful. That's amazing. But things were only going to get a little bit better. So you got the Niagara Creed. And again, I don't even know how many independent fundamental Baptists I've met. Have you heard the Niagara Creed? No. The Niagara Creed? No. The Niagara Creed. You could go to if you just call all the independent fundamental Baptist churches in your local area today. Just call them. First, ask the pastor, are you aware of the Niagara Creed? See if they say yes or no. If they say no, that's utterly devastating. And say, well, I don't think you're really a fundamentalist. Okay. And second, if they say, well, I'm aware of it. Okay, do you teach it? Do you give out copies of it? No. That just tells you what happened. They abandoned the theological foundation. And I think in some ways you can look at that happened throughout much of Protestant Christianity. How many Christians do you know who don't know the Apostles' Creed, don't know the Nicene Creed, don't know the Athanasius Creed? They don't even know what happened in the first 7 ecumenical councils. They don't know anything. They're like completely illiterate when it comes to church history. Because church turned into moralism. Church turned into culture wars. Church turned into politics. It turned into social clubs. It turned into pietism. It turned into moralism. It left its theological foundation and base. So, but that gets us to 1910, between 1910 and 1915. And oh, lo and behold, hang on, I got it right here. I got one of them. 1910 to 1915, the fundamentals. The fundamentals. Now, I have pleaded and begged. I've tried to get people to read the Niagara Creed. I've tried to get people to memorize it. I've tried to get people to study it with basically no one cares, okay? But I've tried. But if I probably had more success with the Niagara Creed than I had with the next thing, because what happens in 1910 to 1915? And in many cases, some would argue historically that this is where the movement gets its name. between 1910 and 1915, a series of 90 essays were published under the title, The Fundamentals, a Testimony to the Truth. The Fundamentals, a Testimony to the Truth, and then to the Law and the Testimony, Isaiah 8:20. I'm looking at the front page here, edited by R.A. Torrey. Oh, R.A. Torrey's name's associated with it, all right? The Fundamentals. Now, I have tried to get everyone to get these 4 volumes. I have begged people to read these 4 volumes. I have pleaded. I've tried everything in my power. I've said pretty much for 20 something years as I was a pastor, these books sat on a table behind the pulpit. And I challenged week after week, month after month, read the books, read the stinking books. And nobody would read the stinking books. Okay. I don't understand. It was like some kind of, we're not going to touch the book. I don't get it. But if you're going to understand modern church history, you have to know the Niagara Creed and you have to know the fundamentals, because this is going to become one of the most influential movements other than so you really got 3 movements that take over Christianity. You got the fundamentalists, you got the charismatics, and you got the evangelicals. Those are the 3 major movements. I'm not saying that there are other things weren't going on. Sometimes in church history, you have to simplify things sometimes, but you can see those 3 streams. And those 3 streams, in many cases, are reacting to this highly intellectual, highly critical attack upon Christianity arising from within Christianity. So, the fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? Again, the 4 volumes. I believe there's 4 volumes. I think I have all 4 volumes around here somewhere. I think 1, 2. I'm looking. I got books scattered all over the place. I believe there's 4 total volumes. I believe there's 4 total. Yeah, I'm looking to see. I say 3. I believe there was 4 total volumes, all right? But there may be 3. I don't remember. Because I just pick them up at different times and don't really focus which volume it is, right? Because they're 90 separate essays. Does it really matter? But you can read them in order. But there you go. So what are they? They were funded by the Stewart brothers. They were sent, and I love this. This is when Christianity seems to have a greater sense of purity. They were sent out free to pastors and missionaries all over the world. They didn't say, hey, Christianity is in trouble and my new book will help defend the truth. Send me $19.99 and you can have the truth so that you can stand against the error, and send $24.99 for my DVD and spend $300 for the conference that I'm going to have. Just stop it, okay? Whenever people start that, they're not genuine, because if they really believe they have the answer, they would give the answer to everyone. They wouldn't put it in a book and sell it for $24.99. And even if they sold the book, they would make the book available for free in other formats. They didn't even have PDF files. They didn't even have the computers. They didn't even have internets. No, they sent them out free to pastors and missionaries all over the world. Why? Because they believed there was a serious crisis going underway. Now, these essays were written by conservative scholars, and they focused on scripture, Christology, atonement, resurrection, miracles, and refuting liberal theology. This was not a publishing project. It was not a church growth project. It was an attempt to defend the truth, define the truth, and refute the errors that they believe was dangerous and an attack upon the biblical Christianity. Now, I don't know how let's put it this way. They were successful at that time because at that time people did read them and they were sent all over the place. And in many cases believe then that this is where they get the name, the fundamentalist. So what is a fundamentalist? At its very nature, a fundamentalist was someone committed to the fundamentals of the faith. A fundamentalist is someone who is committed to the fundamentals of the faith. Now, by the time you get to the 80s and the 90s, maybe even somewhere in the 70s, I think a fundamentalist becomes something far different. What's a fundamentalist? They're KJV only. They don't like contemporary music. They hate secular music. They don't like going to movie theaters. They don't like playing cards. Women can't wear pants. Men cannot have long hair. You must wear a tie. You can't do this. You can't do it. It becomes a fundamentalist as someone who just doesn't like any fun. Okay, all right, now, all right. Maybe that's a little being sarcastic. It's the point is they become known for something other than the fundamentals of the faith, because I will argue in many cases their ability to even explain, discuss deep theological issues about the fundamentals of the faith, well, it's a joke. Listen to some of the preaching of fundamentalists today. It's an embarrassment to theology. So what happened? So here's what we need to make sure we understand. So that gets us through a big period of time, right? That gets us through the Niagara Conference, the Niagara Creed, and the fundamentals. If we could just freeze the movement right there, if we could just stop it right there. I mean, 90 essays. Oh, I mean, like here's one right here in this volume, the atonement. The atonement, right here, the atonement. I've got what Christ teaches concerning future retribution, sin and judgment to come. Paul's testimony to the doctrine of sin. I'm just going through some of these essays. Doctrines to be emphasized in evangelism, justification by faith, the nature of regeneration, salvation by grace, the grace of God, all one, at one moment by propitiation. Let's see, what else? A message, let's see. The place of prayer and evangelism, the Sunday school's true evangelism, and so we could go on. The providence of God here as Romanism, Christianity. I mean, just so many articles and essays about very important theological issues. Now, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, that's not the point. The point is they were defending, and it was a theologically driven movement. And if you look at fundamentalism, I don't ever see it as someone who's went to so many of their schools and Bible institutes and have read so many books and heard so much of their preaching. I didn't see it as a theological movement. I thought it lost its ever-living mind at times. So what fundamentalism actually was? At its core, fundamentalism was doctrinal. It was confessional. It had a creed. It was defensive, very defensive, polemical, and concerned with truth. It was a coalition formed to defend non-negotiable Christian doctrines against theological modernism. It was not a soul-winning strategy movement. It was not a church growth system. It was not a numbers-driven machine. It was not a political bloc that Republicans could count on. It wasn't Trump is God. No, it wasn't any of that, thank goodness, all right? All that comes much later, sadly to say. Now, we're going to run out of time. We're not going to get very far. See if we can get through one. Let's see if we can get to the first kind of shift where things begin to change. So if we could just freeze it right there, fundamentalism, who wouldn't want to be a fundamentalist? Other than maybe people who don't want to fight, people don't want to debate, people don't want to argue. I can understand that. I can see why the evangelicals are like, man, we just don't want to fight and argue. We just want to go to church. I just want to be able to have a nice sermon about Jesus. I don't want to hear you ranting and raving and screaming about this and this doctrine. I can understand. I do understand that, right? I mean, come on. Do you want someone to have to constantly fight every theological battle? But that's what the fundamentalists were doing. And they felt like that they had to because they felt like Christianity was literally under attack. And if you go through church history, whenever people feel Christianity was under attack, what did they do? You get the 7 ecumenical councils. You get creeds produced. Back then, you got the anathemas announced that anathematized people. So at that point, man, the movement, I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not even saying if I lived back then, I would agree with everything. I probably would have found myself in conflict with them. But at least you can look back going, man, They were trying. And maybe you didn't like their fighting attitude. Maybe you didn't like their being so condemning and condescending. But if you read the fundamentals, they come across very intellectual, academic, at least to a certain degree. Maybe not, they're essays, so they're not going to be like a full-blown, intellectual thesis on some of these things, but they produced 90 essays to deal, and they dealt with theological issues. They weren't attacking people on, look at the music they're listening to. It wasn't anything like that. So it was very doctrinal, theological, biblical, and just something that, man, you almost have to applaud what was going on. But then we have kind of the first shift that begins to occur. And this is between the 1920s and 1930s, all right? So now things happen. They're already trying to defend everything, but they're trying to defend things, like I said, from a theological standpoint. But now things start getting really ugly, all right? This is we can call this the controversy era, right? So now comes the period of seminary battles. The seminary, and I think ultimately their strategy is, hey, these seminaries are corrupt. We're leaving. Denominational fights, and they leave. They just say, forget it. We're done. You get the Scopes trial that shows up there, this argument about, evolution and creation. And so I think it's kind of the first sign of, I don't know if I can say this historically. I think I can be accurate. That they're going to fight culture wars, right? It's going to be about culture wars, right? And to me, I'm like, who cares what the public school? It's a public school, people. It's a public school, right? If you want a Christian school, go form a Christian school. And guess what starts happening here? And this really begins to set up the framework. We're going to leave the seminaries. Right? We're going to leave seminaries and we're going to create Bible institutes in the local church. All right? So that pastor that's running that Bible institute probably not at times going to have the same academic credentials and the academic skills that many of those seminary professors would have. So you're going to start getting kind of a non-intellectualism that starts creeping into independent fundamental Baptists, right? You're going to leave denominations. So now you get this very independent church movement, very much an independent church movement, all right? And this can start creating some form of isolation, right? And then the Scopes trial, we're going to start fighting almost culture wars, and we're going to almost kind of demand that the culture do what we want kind of thing, right? And then you get major institutional splits. Major splits start occurring. So at this point, really in the 1920s to 1930s, fundamentalism becomes very embattled, very separated, very defensive, and more isolationist in a sense. It's me, my church, and you may even begin to view the other independent fundamental Baptist churches with some level of suspicion. Maybe that wasn't so bad in the 1920s and 1930s. I think by the time you move forward, it becomes that. But it becomes this almost anti-intellectualism. And I'm not saying it starts in the 1920s or 1930s, but this is going to lead to this, well, I'm no theologian. I'm not one of these Bible scholars, right? This very anti-intellectualism, which is kind of sad because if you go back, it started off with a creed and the fundamentals. But now it kind of becomes like, almost a different kind of mindset starts creeping in. And that's majorly problematic. That becomes majorly problematic. And they're still doctrinal. How can I say this? In the 1920s and 1930s, they're still doctrinal. I don't want you to misinterpret me here. But it's now they're under siege. It's like it's now the fighting really gets the fighting becomes more of they have always been defensive and fighting. But I think in the 1920s and 30s, the fighting really kicks in. It really kicks in, I think. So the movement starts to harden a little bit, I think, if that makes sense. All right. And then we'll get one more. I know we're at an hour. We'll get one more. So that's the first shift. We'll call it the controversial error. Then we get to revivalism and pragmatism start showing up. And this is between the 1940s and the 1970s. A lot happens here between the 1940s and the 1970s. See, after World War II, cultural Christianity kind of explodes. Suburban churches grow. Evangelistic crusades are flourishing. Bus ministries are booming. Numbers are skyrocketing. And success now becomes visible. It becomes measurable. It becomes numerical. And sometimes when all of this happens, maybe your focus stops. Maybe you're no longer fighting. You're no longer. Your focus starts changing. Now it's about, how do we keep growing? How do we build bigger buildings? How do we have more programs? How do we keep all these people happy? Do you become a victim of maybe this period of success? It's no longer fighting and defending. It's now managing success. So I think in a roundabout way, what kind of happens during this period is your faithfulness is not your defending those fundamentals. Your faithfulness becomes your effectiveness. How effective are you? How many baptisms did you have? How many people was in your Sunday school? How many people showed up Sunday night? How many people got saved this year? How many people are in your bus ministry? So it's no longer about truth, it's about results. How many people walked the aisle? How many said a sinner's prayer? Theology becomes now more about technique. How do you get people in? How to bring a friend to church Sundays? Let's have a revival during the middle of the week in October so that we can get people here. It becomes that. Doctrine is more about the impact it has, not the truthfulness of the doctrine. And let me make it very clear. No one just announced. It's not like an announcement was sent down on high. There's no denominational structure within the fundamentalist, right? For the most part, they have left the institutions for the most part. And so it's not like that it was an announcement. It's just a shift begins to change. And I think because of the success and what had happened, cultural Christianity had exploded. And we'll leave it right there. What happens in times of great success in a church? What happens when the church is growing? What happens when you bring in more people? When you bring in more people, you bring in more problems because everybody's going to want this and they're 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 going to want this. And even though people show up saying they want one thing, almost inevitably, they will demonstrate they want something other than what they said at the beginning. I mean, I witnessed this in my church went through a big period of great success. The sanctuary was packed. We were thinking about trying to buy property to get more parking. I mean, everything was going great. And I knew that it would not ultimately last. I knew that, right? And then what do you start seeing? Well, I don't like this, and what about this? And I don't like this, and we don't and then you're just like, oh boy, here we go. And then sooner or later, if you don't give the people what they want, they leave you. And they don't care about you. They don't care about the families left behind. They just want what they want. And so when you get more people, you get more of these kinds of problems. So now you're not fighting for the fundamentals of the faith. You're trying to manage a church. You're trying to manage people. You're trying to manage personalities. You're trying to manage expectations. You're trying to, and now you got to have programs. You got to do this. You got to do this. And it becomes more about managing an institution than it is about defending doctrine. Even though you still may be trying to do that, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. But I'm saying something goes haywire here. It's almost you lose sight. You're not fighting anymore. You're succeeding. You're not fighting. What are you fighting? You got 500 people. You got money pouring in. You're packing out the building. Okay, what do you're now the flavor of the month. You're doing great. What are you fighting about? What are you arguing about? Now, I think what happens is they start fighting and arguing about now other things. When they're not going to be fighting about those original fundamentals, they're going to start fighting. And this is where I think things go haywire. They start fighting over ridiculous things. Dress and music and culture and movies and Hollywood and oh my goodness, and every other just nonsensical thing. It's no longer doctrine and truth. It's like, oh, we're going to fight over this and we're going to fight over that. They got to find something to fight about. They just seem to stop. If you're being so successful, then are you still have the same battle with those fundamentals of the faith? You think you won. We defended the fundamentals of the faith and look at our success. Now it's going to be about moralism. It's going to be about don't drink, don't smoke, don't run with the girls that do. It's going to be, don't dance, don't have sex. It's going to be moralism and standards and rules and that kind of thing. And because now the compromise is going to be, look at the culture. See, cultural Christianity exploded, but look at them. Look at how they dress. Look at the music they're using over in that church. Look what they're doing. And so now you attack everyone, not even on the grounds of doctrine anymore. And that's where you begin to lose sight. And once you start losing sight, it's all going to come tumbling down. All right. Next time, we will start. See, we've made it to... We're in the 1940s to the 1970s, and so we're going to have to mention in the next episode... Right here, what I have in my hands, the Sword of the Lord newspaper. Cannot talk about fundamentalism without this newspaper. That's why I tell everyone all the time, get you a subscription to the Sword of the Lord newspaper. Just do so for historical purposes. One, it's a newspaper that shows up at your house. That's pretty radical. But two, this was the voice of fundamentalism. This was it. I mean, right here on the paper at the very front, an independent Christian publication standing for the verbal inspiration of the Bible, the deity of Christ, his blood atonement, salvation by faith, New Testament soul winning, and the premillennial return of Christ, opposing modernism, liberalism, worldliness, and formalism. I mean, there's the voice of fundamentalism. This paper becomes very influential, and you could talk about what it did, what it didn't do, the good, the bad, but it's the track record of fundamentalism in a lot of ways. All right. I wish I could give you something rather profound. I think the point is it's very difficult within Christianity to keep our focus on what it's supposed to be because we all live in this world. We live lives, and you know it in your life. How easy it is to forget fundamentals of the faith and doctrine and church history and study and exegesis. And we get caught up with so many other things in our own life. And church life is the same way. At one point, you're focused on this, but then this happens and this changes and this occurs. And you constantly are in flux and things happen. And the next thing, within movements, the same thing. And I think ultimately, you just lose your focus of what you were and you become something that maybe you never intended to be. That can happen in our own lives. So, there you have it. We'll continue the history of fundamentalism in our next episode. And just imagine this all started because we just reviewed a couple of minutes of a sermon from 1988 that completely destroyed a simple passage. But by the time you get to 1988, we haven't gotten there yet in our timeline. We already know where they are in 1988. They can't read a Bible verse. Okay. So clearly something went horribly wrong. All right. All right. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. Hopefully that was a beneficial study of church history. God bless.